I'm Aaron Hall, a Minneapolis attorney. We work with a lot of small businesses, and today we're speaking with a small business expert. Mike Ryan is a director of the Twin Cities Small Business Development Center, which is an invaluable resource for business owners. And to the business owners, it's free. Now, Mike, we talked a little ahead of time about the fact that startups, meaning brand new businesses, are not necessarily your target market. You are compensated by Congress and by those that donate in order to help grow jobs, which is generally by an operating business. Let's start first for the small business owner who's a startup, really getting their feet wet in entrepreneurship. What free resources are available to them?
Well, as you mentioned, we don't do a great deal of work with startups because our mission really is to help create jobs and have a positive economic effect. So primarily we have an agreement with an organization called SCORE, which used to stand for Service Corps of Retired Executives. They don't go by that tagline anymore. But what they do, it's a free service to startups and pre-venture individuals. So people who are testing their idea or just want to get a sense of, is this a feasible idea? Is this something to leave my day job for?
And these are experienced business executives who volunteer their time to help entrepreneurs.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And they're not all retired.
Sure.
They're not all just retired folks. There are active people, business owners, all kinds of folks. But our agreement with SCORE is, for the most part, if an individual comes to us with a thought or an idea, we'll ask them to work with SCORE at least to develop the business plan. If they come through that and they have what appears to be a viable business, then we'll take another look and see if we can help them out. But by and large, most of these startups never actually start.
Sure.
So we really can't focus too much of our time on those.
Who are the businesses that really can be helped by you?
Well, typical business for us, where we would look, we would be the best fit, would be typical for us, $1, $2 million, $3 million small manufacturer looking to expand, looking to grow their market share, get into different products. That's really ideal for us because the manufacturing base is important for the Twin Cities. They also tend to create pretty good jobs.
So what does this look like on a practical standpoint? A business owner calls you up and says, hey, I have a company here, it's going. They probably tell you they have some challenges which prompted the call. Maybe it's money challenges. What do you do from that point forward with them?
It is true. They don't usually call us to say things are going really well.
Right.
They're pretty happy on their own if that's the case. Usually there's some symptom. There's some obstacle they've come up against. Generally it's tied to cash. That's usually the indicator. They're short of cash. They're falling behind on their debt. We can usually figure out what's going on. Generally it's revenue. They just don't have the business. They can't support the business. It's not growing like they would like it to. So the process that we like to go through is if a prospective client wants to come and work with us, I try my very best. I try to interview them first, either by telephone or in person, to find out, first of all, are they a good fit? You know, if we can't help them, there's no sense. Let's manage these expectations so people know what they're in for. If they're a good fit, meaning they have revenue, they have a track record, they're profitable or somewhat profitable, and we can help them, then I kind of think through my staff and who the people I have working with me at St. Thomas, who's the best fit? Do they have marketing issues? We have some terrific marketers. Do they have some financing issues? We have some really good numbers people to help them get credit, to expand their business, to help them to grow. We help them with marketing plans, product development, things like that.
So how much time will your staff actually spend with the average business owner?
We work with between 400 and 500 businesses a year.
Wow.
A typical client for us, we may spend a period of 10 to 20 hours over 3 to 6 months. That's just kind of typical. And that'll be several meetings. And we don't do the work.
Sure.
We can only advise. We're not allowed to do anything. We can advise them, but we'll give them assignments. We'll go through their business plan, go through their marketing plans, and say, hey, you really should take a look at this or that issue. Or we've worked with so many businesses, there's not many things that we haven't seen, at least in some form.
Do you see any common problems that are brought to you, and if so, how do you advise them with those?
The most common problem, there are a couple of problems, but the most common is people taking too much money out of the business. Business owners work very hard, and if they're profitable, they often take the money out of the business and they don't leave enough in. They don't leave enough in to operate. And they get into trouble because they try to replace that money with debt. And the leverage starts going up. And then things start collapsing.
Is there a general rule about how much operating income should be left in the business?
I don't know if there's really a rule. I like to see, I don't like to see debt more than 2 or 3 times the equity in the business.
Sure.
That's okay. There's good reasons to borrow money. Borrowing for long-term assets or growth is one thing. Borrowing to cover losses is not a good thing, and that's where we start to run into problems. But people having cash flow issues, taking too much money out of the business.
Okay. So business owners who are ongoing, they have employees, they're having some problems like this, what's the next step for getting in touch with you?
Well, we would have our initial conversation.
Okay.
Then generally, I will, or one of my colleagues will run through a fairly detailed analysis of their financial situation.
Okay.
Because that is an objective way for us to look at the business. Often what they're telling us, it's not that they're not truthful, it's they're maybe not putting their finger on the problem.
Sure.
I need to look at the numbers, or we look at the numbers, and then we tell them what we think is the issue. And sometimes it's the same thing and sometimes it's not. But we like to take that sort of an objective look at about 3 years worth of financial history and figure out what we think are the issues. And then we'll confirm that with the owner to say, do you agree with this? Is this something we want to work on? Because if we don't get their buy-in to the plan, to a plan to fix things or get it improved, it's not going anywhere.
I was delighted to hear about your organization and the free resources that it offers. SCORE does something very similar for a different market. Are there other organizations or resources out there that you're aware of where business owners can get this type of help?
Yes, there are. There are really too many to mention because I'm sure leave some out. But let me say this. I would welcome people to call us directly. If we are not the best fit for them, I do know where all these other places are. And we'll get them to the right spot. If it's not the best fit for us, it's very seldom we'll send somebody away unhappy. We'll say, hey, we're not the people, but these folks are. And there's 25 places out around town that do this stuff. So I hesitate to start mentioning any of them. But they can get to those through us.
Mike, you meet with a lot of business owners who may have problems or struggles. Sometimes they're aware of the problems, sometimes they're not. Do you see any common issues among business owners that might provide some tips to those who are watching?
Well, there's one thing that might surprise you, and that is it's not unusual for an entrepreneur to underprice or charge too little for their services.
Interesting.
It may have something to do with the Minnesota Nice.
Sure.
Not wanting to really brag about yourself or charge what you really are worth.
Can you give me an example of that?
You see that a lot in service businesses. And it causes some problems. They don't charge enough because they don't see any costs. It's a service business. I'm not buying widgets, I'm not buying sheet metal, I'm not painting things, I don't have out-of-pocket costs. So they don't recognize that there really is a cost, a fixed cost to running their business, and they're not covering it. So one of the strategies, and it's usually a terrible strategy in service businesses, I'm going to get the business by underpricing. And it does a couple of things. It can just wreck the industry. I mean, it can wreck the local businesses because now everybody's racing to the bottom. But they really need to give themselves credit. I mean, if they have a skill or a marketable service or product, perhaps, they need to charge the proper amount. And that's something that we can walk them through. They may not recognize all the costs that go into this business just because it's not necessarily out of their pocket at the moment. So that's a fairly common thing in service businesses, and we try to shake them out of that if we can.
How often do you work with the spouse of the business owner? I imagine business owners sometimes work closely with the spouse, maybe both in the business. Other times the spouse is doing his or her own thing.
Well, we get to know the spouses quite often.
Okay.
Just because the finances are so tied together. Often they're working in the business together.
I was wondering about that, how often they're in the business versus not.
It's hard to say. It's common. I wouldn't say most of the time, but it is common to have the spouse working with you. I'm not saying it's a great idea.
Sure.
Necessarily. Do you really want to be with this person all the time?
And I can understand there's a value in having, you're on the same page, you have aligned interests, you both know what's going on. On the other hand, then you take that stress home every day. You're both being bearing that same load. That you don't have that reprieve going home like you would if the spouse is not involved.
There is some of that. There's some interesting dynamics when this happens more than you would know, more than you would think. When the wife is actually running the business and the husband is a subordinate.
Sure.
It causes an interesting dynamic.
Right.
The other thing that it causes, you're so not diversified. Mm-hmm. Your fortune and your family's fortune is tied to that one business.
Interesting.
You wouldn't want to be in a corporation and have your retirement all in that corporate stock. So you have everything in that one basket. So it gets fairly stressful. But we get to know the spouses fairly well.
One of the common problems that causes people to come to you is lack of cash flow. At what point do you advise businesses to take on debt? What are the factors that would say, hey, it's a good idea, take on debt?
Well, first of all, we would like to figure out what the debt is for. The principle in finance and financing your business is you want to match the duration of the assets and the liabilities. So taking on long-term debt makes a lot of sense if you're building a building, putting in a long-term asset. Taking on long-term debt to finance some short-term losses is not a good thing. You put yourself in a big hole, and it's difficult to get out. What we generally do is look at the cash flow of the business. What are they going to use it for, and are they able to cover that debt service? That means the principal and the interest in a sufficient way with enough cushion. Generally, the lenders will be looking for a certain ratio, and we know what that is, and we can guide them. But we don't like to take on debt. Equity, your own money, can be used for anything.
Sure.
That's the best way to finance it. And when it's all possible, we recommend bootstrapping, which is a term that you may be familiar with, which means essentially financing your business with retained earnings, keeping the money in the business. It goes back to people taking too much money out. So debt, going into debt for the right reasons is great because it's cheap. I mean, the borrowing now is incredibly inexpensive if you have good credit.
I see.
I just wouldn't want to overdo it.
Right. That's good.